Hi, and welcome to this special episode of the Parties Podcast. In this episode, I'm going to be talking about how to set up and start your own podcast. So I'll talk slowly and clearly as I can so that you can take it in. You may need to listen to this once or twice or a couple of times or watch this, over to go over these things that I'm going to be talking about. So this personally is something that, worked for me. This is, the list that I've written down and the things I'm going to be talking about are what have worked for me. You will find your own way. I'm not saying that this is the definite way to do it, but what I'm going to say is this is what worked for me and this is how I've done it. And you can try this way or you can kind of, tweak it and find your own. But I'm just putting this out there, to help you if you're interested, in starting your own podcast. I kind of just dove into it and learned as I went along. So I think it's nice that, you can be able to listen to this or watch this and take advice from it if it's something that you're thinking about. And I also, really appreciate your support on the podcast, really appreciate you listening. And I hope you take value from this, and I hope that you can take something from this and use it if you're thinking about making a podcast or a blog or video log or whatever it may be. Okay, so ultimately, I would recommend using Anchor. I first started using Anchor FM, which is a free app, and it's owned by Spotify, and it's a podcasting host. So you can record and edit your podcast within the app itself. It has its own editing studio in the app where you can cut, paste, upload, import out music and podcast material into the app. And it's very, straightforward over time. To begin with, you have to get your head around the menu. But I would heavily recommend using that as a starting base, and that is audio only, and it's free as well. It uploads your podcast to the major streaming services automatically for you. It's all built in once you publish that episode, and it works by you copy the link and you send the link to somebody else, and they get joined into your podcast meeting, and it records up to 2 hours. So if you're having a podcast for 2 hours, it will then cut off at that 2 hour point. So it runs up to 2 hours. It's definitely how I learned to podcast. It's definitely what I chose to use. There are many other platforms out there. You can use Zoom audio as well if you're not wanting to, use Anchor. But then that's a whole different process of editing. But yeah, I definitely recommend Anchor FM, and that's audio only. You need to have a podcast name. So what is the name of your podcast? Are you, wanting to have it as your own name, or are you thinking of something inclined with the niche or theme that you're thinking about? The name can be tweaked. Try not to focus too much time on your name. It can also be tweaked and things like that. But I wouldn't change it too many times, as well. Try and stick with something, but just play around with ideas and ask for people's advice. Ask for people's opinions. If you have all these different names for your podcast, put it out there and see what people think. I'd definitely recommend doing that. Podcast logo. So the logo can also be tweaked and changed. I've seen people do it numerous times, but try not to do it. I'd say more than 5 times because people might lose track of the podcast possibly. But the podcast logo, what is it you want to have to represent your podcast? I first made my own photo where I had a picture of myself and I had Parts City Podcasts and I had a filter on it and things like that. So you can have whatever you want as a logo, really. You could find somebody who's a graphic designer or someone who can make logos. That's always a bonus. But if you want to make your own logo and you haven't really got the financial backing to pay someone or the software to do it yourself, you can download an app called Canva, Canva, and it's a free app. The pro version just gives you access to more images and videos and themes. But you can get it for free. You can use it on your desktop, and there's a whole big template option for logos, and it's very simple, quick, and easy, and professional as well. So yeah, you need a logo, a name, and also the theme as well. What is the theme and structure of your podcast? Is it scripted? Is it well structured, or is it pretty much free flow? The free flow side of it is, open questions, no kind of like theme to it. You're very much interviewing somebody or just talking about lots of different things, with that person, where you can engage in a conversation. Or you can have the structured side of it where you can have a theme as how it plays out, an introduction to the person, a set of questions like an interview, and you use those questions with that person you're interviewing, or you use that kind of those topics if it's just you as a solo talking. Whereas my approach, I kind of have it free flow, but I'll also ask, questions. What are your role models? Who are your role models? Favorite books. What is success to you, or happiness? These kind of key things that I will mention in most of my podcasts and bring up. But that is also something that I'm going to be changing and tweaking and working on over time. But you've got to do what works for you ultimately. So there is also that as well to take into consideration. I've been on other people's podcasts where they'll have, a theme, they'll have an introduction, they'll talk about set topics, and then, about you and your story. So there's different ways of doing it. I'd recommend watching other podcasts, listening to other podcasts, and seeing how other people structure their podcast as well. But also with that, as you're podcasting, you might get questions that pop up in your head as you're talking anyway. So that's what works for me. Different niches. So what area is your podcast going into? Are you going to look at entertainment and movies and film? Are you going to look at comic books, sports, entertainment, books, education, food, nutrition, physical health, personal development, mindset, business? There are all these different niches of podcasting that you can go into. So you've got to go with what area that you think is best, or just even play around with it. I focus on mindset, personal development, mental health, and well-being. And I aim to provide value through connecting with people and listening to their stories and the things that they do and where they got to where they are, and, the things that they went through. But I also have had people on from all these different backgrounds. And sometimes I'm not always talking about personal development and mindset. I'll be talking about current trends with what's happening in the world, the news, technology, people's books, authors coming on the podcast, things like that. So I'm very open to other areas, but you can always do that. You don't have to have a selected, set in stone niche where you only focus on one particular thing. It's, how you play around with that. So the duration and time of your podcast, how long is it going to be going on for per episode? Is it 15 minutes? Is it half an hour? Is it 1 hour? Is it 2 hours? Is it 3? I mean, that's pretty extreme, when you're pushing towards 3 hours. I've personally done podcasts which have lasted for around 2.5 hours, nearly 3 hours at times. I try and stick to around half an hour because I'm mindful of other people's time. And I think that's something you need to think about as well as the audience and the listener. Have they got time to listen to, that content? If it's more than half an hour, then they're going to have to go back to it, or they might be listening to it on, whilst they're doing their dishes or a car journey. So, it doesn't matter how long you have it on for. It's just you need to think about people and their time as well. But, I do most of my podcasts for an hour or an hour and a half, or sometimes 40 minutes. The conversation can go on with a flow. So just think about that as well. Anchor also has, I've gone over that. Is your pod? So audio and video. So you can have an audio podcast, which goes out to all the major streaming platforms, or you can do video as well. Me personally, I I did a podcast via audio for the first 60 episodes that I did. So I did that on audio because I was building up my confidence and learning how to podcast and how to, play around with it. So are you doing audio or are you doing video as well? You're doing audio and video, which is always good which my next thing I'm going to come into is that if you do the video, you can repurpose that content. You can cut down the clips from your podcast. And I think people pretty much like to see video. It grabs people's attention, I think, more than audio. That's just me as a person. I like to see video. I'm very visual. I don't mind hearing things as well. But, you can also, with talking about repurposing content, when I talk about repurposing content, it is making a podcast, taking that podcast, breaking it down, taking clips from that episode, and putting that content onto your social media platforms. And you can do that on audio via an app and program called Headliner, which is free for the basic version. And then you can buy the pro account as well. And that basically cuts down clips from your episode, the audio, and it's audio only, I think, and video as well. And it takes the audio clips, puts them into an audiogram, which you can then put onto your Instagram stories and social media, etc. So that's called Headliner. So that's definitely important as well, repurposing your content as well. Are you using Zoom? You can use Zoom, which I moved to because I've got the audio and the video. I pay for the basic account where I get a gigabyte of storage, and I can keep my content on the cloud, via which I'm recording now, and to save that. There's also StreamYard, which you can then stream live on multiple social media platforms where you stream your podcast to LinkedIn's, Instagram, whatever it may be. So that's called StreamYard. And there's also like a big kind of editing platform within that where you can really play around and introduce the comment section and things like that. That's something that I'm going to be looking to do in the future. So I've talked about StreamYard, live streaming, podcasting intro and outro. So podcast intro and outro, I think, is important because in the intro, you can talk about your podcast and what you have to offer and what the podcast is about. And I do that on my podcast where I think I talk for around 45 seconds to a minute. Try and keep it to around, I'd say, no longer than a minute and a half. People will just want to digest it quick and see what it's about. And you can add an instrumental in the background for that as well. So intro to the podcast. And you can have an instrumental, you can have a song. I'm lucky enough to know someone who's one of my friends who made me my instrumental intro and outro song for my podcast. So you can always, you can make your own instrumental intro, outro, or you may know someone or reach out to somebody who specializes in being able to do that. So there's different ways of playing around with it, but everyone has their own intro and outro theme. Everyone has their own intro and outro kind of time frame on it. But I also do a pre-intro. So I talk about the guest before they come on the podcast. So I'll introduce them for around 15 to 30 seconds, talking about who they are, what they do, and what we probably talk about in that episode. And then I, in the next clip, introduce the episode. And then when the episode is finished, I then have the outro beat, which plays. And then also, which I've got nearly to mention, was that when you've done the intro and outro, you could then have yourself talking about saying thank you to your audience, where to subscribe, anything else you want to throw in, like I can't even say it now, podcast sponsorships or advertisements, or any other message that you want to put out there. You can put that at the end of your podcast as people finish listening to it. So I've talked about that pre-intro. Be consistent in your content. Try and be consistent in your podcast, whether that's one episode a week, whether that's an episode a day. Try and keep it regular so you keep your audience, listening to your content. that's just how I think, we like to work. We like to have that consistency and see there's a new episode, because people may listen to something else and you may lose certain members of your audience. So be consistent with it as well. And I think with consistency, you just become better in your craft as a person, whatever it is, not just podcasting. So try being consistent with your episodes. You could have a time frame of when you release each episode, say every Thursday at 5 p.m. GMT time, whatever it may be, whatever your structure is, or you can just put them out whenever you want. But I would definitely say be consistent with it and be patient as well. I think that's be patient, be consistent, and enjoy the process. Those are things that I learned last year. Okay. Put the snippets on social media. I've spoken about that. Create a social media account for the podcast, or keep it on your existing personal one if that's what you're uploading it to. I've seen people have separate accounts for the podcast, or they may have it on their existing social media account. Don't always change it. Don't keep on switching your account from one to the next. Try and keep it in the same account if possible, because otherwise, you may have to then build up that audience again, if that makes sense. I personally use it on my own personal account. I did create a separate account until I got told about, trying to keep it under the same umbrella, which I have been doing ever since. Personal accounts, just not change too much. Reach out to people and DM them via social media, whether it be their emails. Reach out to people and tell them what your podcast is about and what it is that you're doing, the theme of the podcast, why you're reaching out to that person or company or whoever it is. Reach out to them on LinkedIn, email, social media. Don't be afraid of rejection. You're going to probably get a lot of no's. You're probably going to get a lot of non-responses. But if you keep being consistent and you keep on asking people, then someone is going to say yes. Even if that's one person out of 100, that's still a person who's going to say yes. If you don't ask, you're going to get a no. If you do ask, you might get a yes or a no. You're still going to get an answer. But even if you don't get any answer, don't give up and keep on reaching out to people as well. You just don't know. But that's what I've done with people. I've reached out to people on LinkedIn and Instagram. And a lot of the time I'll get, no's. A lot of the times I'll get a yes. Sometimes I might not get any response. Just keep on going and pursuing what you're doing, because you just don't know who's going to say yes. And as well, engage with people in comments on social media and threads, whether that's Instagram, LinkedIn, whatever platform you use. Network with people, build up your network, and engage with people. Reach out to them, tell them what you're doing, that kind of thing. That always builds, your audience. That always builds people in being on your podcast. And, you don't know who they're going to mention you to and who that person's going to then mention you to as well. And then it just kind of spreads and gets you out there. And you just don't know what opportunities are going to come your way from that. Interact with your audience on social media. Respond to comments, respond to messages, engage with people when you put content out, and build up that audience. And, you don't know what friends or connections you're going to make or build from that. The internet is a very amazing place. It is a tool, and it all depends on how you use it and how you engage in it. As well, that's something that I'm going to be doing more so, is like creating a community via Facebook or LinkedIn or social media, and creating a page where people can engage with your content and network, and you create a community where you can put your content out there and for people to see it and to engage with it. So you build almost like a family on that network. That's something I've just started doing on LinkedIn and Facebook. I don't really use Facebook too much, but creating a group and having that on there is a very good presence to have. But you've got to use whatever platform works for you at the end of the day. Try and post on all platforms. I don't really put too much on TikTok, but that's something that I'm going to be doing more this year, is putting more content on TikTok, because it's kind of where a lot of eyeballs are going now, and it's where a lot of attention is. And also, if a social media app goes down or finishes, or the algorithm goes down, you can also pivot. It's how you pivot onto that other app. How you can then put that content somewhere else. Because if you put in all your content on Instagram and then it crashes or people stop using it, then you've then got, then you've got that leverage and that audience on the other platform still there, and you know how to use it as well. Repurpose your content in all platforms too. So upload your content and repurpose it and break it down and put it on Instagram, put it on Facebook, put it on LinkedIn, TikTok, Snapchat. Did I miss one? Facebook. Repurpose your content and put it on, distribute it in all the areas if possible. Okay, repurpose your content. Look into monetizing your content. So monetizing is where you can then make money through your content and your podcast. It's something that I'm looking into right now. It's something that I'm slowly learning. So you can then have merch. So you can have merchandise. If you're looking at having merchandise, I would say a good starting point is a website called Redbubble. It's free. You create an account. You can then have your logo or whatever it is that you want to put on your merch. And you can only decide what percentage that you want to make from it. If you want to make 10%, then the price of your merchandise will be very, very low. If you want to make 100% profit, then the merchandise will go to a higher price. So you can't select exact price on it. So that's a good starting point. Redbubble, it's called. So you can have merchandise where you can monetize your podcast, advertisements, sponsors. So through advertisements and sponsors, you need to reach out to companies, people, products, whoever it may be that you want to have on your podcast, wherever that might be. It could be hair shampoo, it could be a t-shirt company, it could be a company that make apps, mental health apps, or whatever it may be. There are companies out there that want to put their content out there and advertise it on podcasts so that they gain traction for their content, and hopefully get someone to buy their content through it being advertised or sponsored on your podcast. So people then charge a pre-roll and a mid-roll and an end roll. And a pre-roll is where, you talk about the sponsor for 15 to 30 seconds or a minute or so before the podcast starts. But what people will do, they'll charge a certain price. It's like an average price. I think it's around $8 per 15 seconds or 30 seconds. Don't quote me on that. But you can find that on the internet anyway. Pre-roll, end roll, mid-roll. Podcast pricing. So that's how you can make income through it. There's many other areas that you can make income through your podcast, sponsorships, deals, this kind of thing. So it's quite something that you need to look into, revise. It's something that I'm still learning and still looking into as we speak right now. But I'll keep you updated on it as I delve more into it. So I'll do more videos on how to monetize your podcast in the future when I reach that stage. Once confident, you can switch to a new host. I was on Anchor for quite some time, but I decided to move to Captivate, where I then have to pay, I think, 19 Great British pounds a month to use Captivate, but they do a 7-day free trial. Pretty sure it's £19. I'll double check that I'll put it in the description. But they put it on many more platforms for you. Any help or questions, you can then email them, and the team get back to you pretty promptly. They put it onto, like I said, they're the only growth host podcast. They're the only growth orientated podcast host out there. and they really then maximize your audience. And you can see on the map where people listen to your podcast, how many downloads you have on the graph, much, much more. It's much more professional to use, and you can really see your analytics and where people are listening, because some of the other hosting apps don't really have that too much. So if you like to see the analytics, if you like to know where your listeners are listening from, and you kind of want a bit more, then I definitely recommend Captivate. Keep doing it. Watch and learn from other people's podcasts. Network with other people in the same field, in different fields. Connect with others, and it comes back to you. That's something that I've learned. That's something that I've experienced. Recommending other people to other people's podcasts, having someone on your show and saying, I think this person's really good for your show. And people, it's how the universe works. People, what you give out is what you get back, and I believe that, very much so. But yeah, I think that's kind of all I have to cover right now. And I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you took some value from it. I hope you learned from it and take some advice from this. And yeah, just keep in mind it's all a process. It takes time. Be patient, and keep doing it. Just show up. Just show up and do it. And that's what it takes. Showing up, booking in the time, and doing it. And I just remembered something now. If you want to, once you get into booking people in for your podcast, I definitely recommend using Calendly.com, where you can download the app and you can send an email to somebody, and they can link in with your calendar, or synchronizers. Or there's Equity, I can't pronounce it properly, Equity scheduling, and it's the same thing. You can link that to Zoom as well. You can also link that app to Zoom, so you don't have to manually paste in the Zoom link to your email. So if you link your scheduling app to Zoom in the settings, when someone books in for your podcast, they automatically get a Zoom link from that booking. So I definitely recommend using a booking link once you then start distributing your podcast out to other people for them to be a guest on your show. Okay, so I think that's everything. I hope you take value from this. I hope you learn from this, and I hope you have a great podcast journey. Any more questions, please email me at thepositivitypodcast@gmail.com, or you can reach out to me on a direct message on Instagram at positivity94, and I'm also on LinkedIn at Adam Parr, P-A-R-R. But I hope you have a great day, and I hope you enjoyed this video and audio, and stay tuned for more content. Have a great day. Cheers.